Okay, so I'm going to show you guys how to put some seals and bearings in some engine cases. These have already been cleaned and vapor blasted and then cleaned multiple times to get all the media out. So I've already got my bearings laid out, my seals laid out, and I'm going to be using some Bond 4 or some 3 Bond 1215 works as well. What I like to do is I like to lay out my bearings per side. I have my left side and my right side case bearings so that when I pull them out of the oven, I'm able to quickly and efficiently get the cases together and the bearings in so that I don't have them get too cold in the meantime. This process basically works the same for 4 strokes and 2 strokes, regardless of the application, whether these are KTM cases or will also work in Kawi or Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki. They're all basically the same. So for these cases, I'm going to need to press in the seal that goes behind this bearing here before I put the bearings in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the seal and I'm going to apply a very thin coat of this Bond to the outside of this, and it's going to go in here like so. Then I will take my tool here and press it in, and if need be, hit the end of the tool with a hammer to make sure that it is fully seated. So I've applied a thin coat of the Bond to the outside of the bearing. I'm going to be using this bearing, race, and seal driver and a hammer. Okay, now that I've driven in the seal, there's still a little bit of the Bond that has come out from around the seal. I'm going to use a rag and some contact cleaner to get that off. On 2 strokes especially, it is very important that all of your seals have a very good seal because they rely on that to not have an air leak and cause the engine to explode because of a lean issue. Since that is the only seal that's going to be going on the inside of the cases, it's the only one I'm going to install currently. Once I get the bearings in and the cases have cooled, I will install the remainder of the seals, which I have here. Now, a lot of people I've seen use torches like this to warm the cases and install the bearings. I don't really like to do that. I like to make sure that my cases are evenly heated so that anything doesn't happen, no warpage or overheat issues. So what I did is I went ahead and bought one of these smokers off of Amazon. It cost me like 150 bucks. I'm able to put both sides of the cases in there and get it to a temperature in which I'm able to just drop the bearings in, and it's all even heat and works very well. Okay, so I've got my stuff ready for this oven. I'm gonna go ahead and set my cases in here. I just normally put this thing on high, put a timer on for about 30 minutes or so, and then once that's up, the bearings will be ready to drop right in. All right, so it's been about 30 minutes. I'm gonna take the cases out of the oven one at a time. I normally just use some welding gloves so that I can handle them because they're gonna be extremely hot. Okay, since this is our right side case, I'm gonna be installing the right side bearings. So with the bearings, you wanna make sure that you check for a lip in case there's a bearing retainer. If there is no lip, I always try to put the bearings with the lettering up. Kind of difficult to see, but normally I'll take them. They just drop right in like so. I always start with the largest one first. Shaky. Like so. That's how simple it is. Only takes a moment. Let it sit. Make sure that you don't turn the case over as the bearings could fall out. So I'll leave it like this for a few minutes and then let the bearings heat up to where they don't fall out. All right, I've got the left side engine case here. Same thing. Check for like a ridge along here just in case there's bearing retainers, but there's not on this, so I'll just make sure the lettering points up. Drops right in. Beautiful. Lettering up. Again, largest to small is the easiest way to do this. Sometimes the bearing will get stuck, in which case I will give it a tap. Now that the bearings are all installed, I can proceed to the next step, and that will be assembling the seals that I have left over. I'm going to wait for the cases to cool, and then I will do that. Also, before that, I like to flip the case over and just verify that the bearings are fully seated, especially this one on the input shaft that you can see is seated, as well on the output shaft. It's kind of hard to see but there will be a gap in there if the bearing is not seated fully. To speed up the process of the cooling, I can put a fan in front of them or something to help with them cool. Otherwise, it may take a little while. And if I don't have a ton of time, I'll just put them in front of a fan and let them cool off for about 15-20 minutes or so. Okay, now that I've got all the bearings in the cases and the cases are cooled to touch, they're not completely cool, but cool enough I can handle them and the Bond won't set too fast. I'm going to go ahead and install the remainder seals, which will include my countershaft sprocket seal and my shift shaft seal and my right side crankshaft bearing seal. Alright, so to put these seals in, I'm going to use the same exact process that I did on the other one. I'm going to use a little bit of the Bond 4, or if you guys have the 3Bond 1215, same thing. 3Bond actually makes this stuff. They just manufacture it and then put the label on it for the Bond. Also, I'm going to use this bearing race and seal driver. I'll find one that's slightly larger than the seal itself, because with this specific seal, we want it to be flush with the surface. If anything, maybe just a little bit pressed in, 1/2 mil or so. In the manual, it'll generally give you specifications on how far to press the seal in, but if you can get it flush or just a little bit below the surface, that'll work just fine. With this sealant stuff, you just basically put a nice even coat around the whole seal, not too thick. It takes a minute to set up, so you don't really have to rush too fast. Alright, so to put the seal in, I'm going to put my bearing race and seal driver, and then I'm going to hit the end with a hammer and drive it in flush. Alright, so I just drove the seal in. There's a little bit of residual of the Bond on there, so I'm going to go ahead and clean that off and get going with the next seals. Now that I've got these seals driven in, I made sure and I cleaned the surfaces just with a little bit of contact cleaner on a rag to get the residual off. Got my seals nice and flush driven in. So that's basically it. I mean, this same process applies to just about any motorcycle that you can think of, really. For the most part, it's pretty simple. Take your time with the bearings. Just make sure the cases are hot enough, because if they're not quite hot enough, the bearing will get stuck. You shouldn't really have to beat it in. Sometimes it might get cocked a little sideways and you'll have to just give it a tap like I did on that bearing. It was actually this bearing right here. Just I couldn't get in there quite good enough with my fingers and dropped it, and it didn't really go straight in. So I'm going to continue with this and make a second part on assembling the bottom end.